Looking back on my career, I can see the elements of my German heritage throughout it, even till today. Uh, I lived in a three-generation household with my German immigrant grandparents, and of course my mother and father and my older brother. And it was shortly after my grandfather died, and my mother and I were going through his things in a closet, and she pulled out, showed me, this is your grandfather's report card that he brought over to this country when he came in 1889. And she showed it to me, and she went over all the subjects and the marks that he got from them. And there was one of them which in German was Naturgeschichte. And she said that that meant natural history. And I thought, hey, here's a 10, 11-year-old who is studying natural history. And she said, well, in their grade schools, when they needed a break from sitting at their desks all day, and the school teacher took them out on walks around the countryside from their village. And they'd look at things, they'd observe this, they'd look at butterflies, they'd look at mushrooms, they'd look at trees. And when they got back into the classroom, the teacher told them to sit at their desks and write an account of what they had seen, what they had observed, what they remembered from their hike in the fields, the woods around their village. And this is what constitute learning about nature. It was experiential learning, which we call it today. You know, you learn by observing and seeing, not by reading words in a book. Experiential learning then became really a hallmark of my life. I wanted to teach students by seeing things out in the field and not by just reading about it in history books. Or you learn by going out in the field. My mother picked up on what her father taught, and she was active in making sure her sons learned a lot by nature. She volunteered when the Department of Conservation began its program for kids called Nature Nights. And in 1942, she organized a group of us on Elm Street into Nature Nights. And one of the things we had to do was to compile a scrapbook. And believe it or not, I still have mine from 42, 43, 44. I want to show you that the Department of Conservation taught us experiential learning. I want to read you this let's see, this is 1942. I'm 7 years old. On July 16th, 1942, we followed a brook in the west part of our town, that's Jefferson City, for a half a mile. It was about 15 feet wide and a gravel bottom. We found schools of minnows, crawfish, long-eared sunfish, a snapping turtle, a blue racer, which I remember because I got to hold it, in the water. Some tiger swallowtail butterflies and a black swallowtail butterfly was found. Ferns and a few flowers we found too, Walter S. And I was in 42, and I thought, that was a great experience for a 7-year-old to have a conservation leader, a professional, take us on a trip and wading along this creek, and that's the German heritage. Now, my mom and dad's 3 sons all got degrees or careers in some form of nature. And I think that shows that it's carried on to the third generation. I was a student at the University of Paris in 1954 and 55. Those were perilous years to be at the University of Paris at that time, because Stalin had just died and Europe was in sort of a turmoil, and France was voting communist at that time. But what I remember in this regard, in France you had to take exams to get out of school, not just accumulate so many hours. And the exam for geography is with history. You take one exam called Histoire et Géographie, history and geography. And I asked about that. Why don't you have? They said, well, you can't separate the two. They're two sides of one coin. History without geography has no location. It has no setting, no context. It's just like events taking place on a white sheet of paper or something. But geography also, you can't do any explanation in geography. This is the important point. You can't do any explaining in geography without going back into the past and saying, this is how that place, that country, that town, that region got to be the way it is. So that's been with me all my life. At the University of Chicago is where I was introduced to the term ecology. The head of the Department of Geography was a man by the name of Harland Barrow. And Professor Barrows said, well, you study a plant's relationship with its environment, you study these animals' relationship. So the human relationship with the environment is also ecology. And to me, that was the first way it got involved with humans, the word ecology. Up to that time, it was with the natural world, and now you get humans involved in ecology. And that stayed with me. But to me, geography has always been human ecology. The state of Missouri does not have a doctoral program in geography. We're one of 3 states in the whole 50 United States that does not have a doctoral program in geography. So in order to get a doctoral program, I got mine in history here, who accommodated me because they had by that time recognized a field called environmental history, which I call historical geography. And they allowed me to do a topic in that. My dissertation really is called a historical geography. So it is a geography written in the history department, and I taught them a few things about geography. And then I suppose the course that I enjoyed the most that I developed was a historical geography of the United States. It combined both geography and history. It showed how different peoples had gone into different environments and occupied them and made them productive and tied them in with the rest of the country. Mapping natural vegetation was a concern. I found, and I'm pretty sure it was from Claire Kuchera in the botany department, that he had used the land survey notes in reconstructing vegetation in 3 counties in northeastern Missouri, and he advised me to use those. In retrospect, I don't think there's one American historian who would not say that the land survey was an enabler as much as anything of the settlement of the United States, of getting people on the land. I think the land surveyors are unsung heroes of the American frontier. So we have all this preserved information, and it was spatially preserved by the corner posts. So when the surveyors were walking these straight lines, they made notes of where they left timber and enter prairie. And that was my key to locating where the prairies were. A real trove of information, these land survey notes. So when I got to them, I looked them up in the state capitol building. That's where I told they were, and indeed that's where they were. And some very helpful woman says, well, we keep them over here. She took me over across the marble floor to this room, and I went in. She said, well, here they are. You know, what do you do when you're looking at, there were 650 volumes. So at that time is when I got to the land survey notes. And when I moved into Saline County, I started using the land survey notes. Well, and then from those two counties, it just spread mainly into northern and western Missouri, because that's where the prairie was, that I got fascinated by. I said earlier that map was all done on free time. I didn't get any grants. I mean, that's impossible for someone today in a university setting to believe that you would spend all your time doing that with no funding. It was all mine. That really surprised me, how many people are interested in prairies. To me, there's no better evidence of that than to look at the support of the Missouri Prairie Foundation. When I see all these people from urban areas who support the Missouri Prairie Foundation, people who recognize the historic importance of it and the biological importance of it with its species that you don't get necessarily other places in abundance. Geography to me, ever since I studied in France, is the relationship of man, that means a generic man, to the environment. The original ecology, and you should study the visible product of that, what you see in the landscape as a result of humans relating to the environment and prairies. I like to read stories about prairies. Those are how people can live with the grasslands.